the cube is 144,000 years, which is, it's Oahspe says, the first dividend in which there's no variation in the vortex of the Earth. Basically what they're referring to there are cycles. That is, all the cycles that are pertinent to the Earth and its movement repeat themselves every 144,000 years. Now that doesn't mean every single nuance. So if I go bleh, and now it's all of a sudden I've added something new to the mix, and therefore you can say that, well, it isn't exactly repeating, but they're not talking about every little nuance of the vortex there. They're talking about cycles and how they're all accounted for underneath the cube, the ones that pertain to Earth here. And so that would be the Gadol of 24,000 years, which has to do with the Earth, actually the Great Serpent moving, and the Earth. See, the Great Serpent moves. The Sun is like the head of the Great Serpent, we learn in Oahspe. And so it moves, it courses along three-dimensionally like that, sort of following like a helix type. Oahspe calls this, when you look at it, they call it a coil. One of those loops is called a coil. If you looked at it straight on, it would look like just like a circle, and you just keep repeating that cycle. This is what Oahspe calls a circuit. So the Sun has a circuit of 4,704,000 years, and so.
But that's not the smallest. That's not the largest.
That's not the largest. But that's one, that is a figure that Oahspe gives for the circuit, 4,700,000 years, and they round it to. And but beneath that, it says that well, the cube is the first dividend in the third space. Well, the third space is this: it's the coil, as the Great Serpent, which is the solar system, is as a snake, and the Sun is as the head. And so it forms, as it goes forward, it forms its helix behind it. It's a wake, and in the wake, following in the wake of that, are the satellites of the Sun. Well, some of those cycles that occur within this 144,000 years, one of them is the Gadol. And that is simply the Earth, as it's moving with the Sun through this particular cycle. The Sun, the North Pole of the Earth, seems to point to the North Star, somewhere on the North Star belt. And the North Star belt, right now, it's pointed to what we call Polaris. And in 24,000 years, it will make what appears to be a circle, trace a circle up in the northern sky. And this, astronomers reckon is 26,000 or thereabouts, 1,000 years, but the actual duration, the average duration, is 24,000 years, which is the Gadol. And if you take a measurement at any particular time, it might be, and then you extrapolate that outward, you might get something like 26,000, or maybe even less, just depending upon when it's done and where in the cycle that occurs, where you're taking the measurements from. Well, anyway, the Gadol, there are 6 Gadols in a cube, in which there's no variation in the vortex of the Earth. And another cycle in that cube is the era, or, well, it's a square. Actually, Oahspe authors, they call it a square. Square because there are, if in the circle, if you take the circle and you put the 4 quadrants in, you have the 4 spokes on the wheel, and there are 4 Danhays in an era. That's why it's called a square, because you can actually square it up if you wish, instead of drawing a circle around it. But in any event, there's it's called a square in Oahspe. But when you're dealing with the Eoptian age of man, now the Eoptian age of man is when man is propagating and capable of eternal life. And before the angels of Sathantes came, man was not, he was propagating, but as Asu, but he was not capable of eternal life. He was the pure animal man.
Yeah. So what is this length of the Eoptian age?
Well, the Eoptian age is actually 96,000 years, a measure of 72,000 years. And then you have 24,000 years beyond the measure. So there's 3 Gadols in a measure, and plus 1 Gadol to the end when man will finish. So that's 4 Gadols. And there's actually 6 Gadols in a cube. So it's 4/6 or 2/3. So when man is 2/3 the way through the cube, that's his Eoptian age. He can go 2/3 of the way, and then the beast gives up. It says now, well, actually the beast doesn't give up. Man says, I'm not going to perpetuate the beast anymore. So they stop propagating. And it's just, man's time is up. He's not going to produce any more souls for heaven.
Okay, so now you've got these different cycles, and
right.
Now once that's only like compared to the large cycles, man's cycle is only very small. So, I mean,
right.
for the prophet, knows and finds out about the cycles in the very long ones. So, why would he need to know such long cycles, even though man is only here for a short time?
Right. Well, that's a very good question, because the cycles, the larger cycles, give context. They show like the background or the milieu within which something is unfolding, and everything, no matter what, if it's a cycle, it can be placed on the wheel, and on the wheel always has. You can have a division into 4, and you can have a division into 12, which is what the Ankh is. The Ankh being the zodiac, and the clocks, the 12-hour clocks, at the hands of the clock. Well, these cycles within the 144,000 years, and smaller than the 12,000 years, which when that square happens during an Eoptian age, it's called an era. And so man has 8 eras to live through. They're developmental stages, we could say.
Yeah, and so the Cosmon is the 7th era.
It is the 7th era, right. And there's one more era after that. And then man will just say, well, I'm not going to perpetuate the beast anymore. So so you can keep going down to smaller and smaller cycles from the 12,000, because the 12,000 is made up from the 3,000, which is the Dan-Hay cycle, which is the basic Etherian administrative unit. And when you're up in Etheria, and that's called the Dan-Hay, when the Etherians come for their great deliverance. Every 3,000 years, on average, 3,000 years. It varies, the cycles, but on average every 3,000 years. So that's also a part of this 144,000 years. And within the 3,000 years cycle, you also have lesser cycles of 666-year cycle of the beast, and the 66-year cycle, 666-year cycle of the great beast, and 66-year cycles of the beast. And there's also the spell, which is a 33-year cycle, and the odes, which are 11-year cycles, and the sweep, which is a 100-year cycle, and so the time, or the wave, which is a wave of the great serpent, is 400 years. One wave, one complete wave, and so 400 years is also a component or a factor actually of 144,000 years, because when they talk about the all the cycles within that 144,000 years, they're talking about cycles that are divisible into that 144,000 years, divided into that, and getting no remainder. In other words, their whole number factors of 144,000 years.
And
so,
then in turn,
right,
144,000 years.
Right. So 4 of those together is called a sum. So these interior ones, they greatly affect man. Now, when you get beyond that 144,000 year, which Oahspe calls a cube, beyond that 144,000 years, then now what's happening is when you get above that, you're making a connection. The Oahspe authors are helping you to make that connection. They're showing that there's a connection between these internal, meaning internal to 144,000 year cycles, and these larger external cycles, and that sort of bridge in between them, or that connection between them, is the sum. They call it the sum, and that's 4 of those 144,000 years cycles. And so that's basically placing on the wheel with the 4 quadrants, and placing a cube in each one, and that'll give you a sum. Well, what's the importance of a sum? The importance of the sum is that a sum is equal, Oahspe authors say, in magnitude to one of the great serpent. And what this means is that this 576,000 years of the sum is the same duration, the same magnitude. Now, they don't call it years. You could call it a duration or years, 576,000 years, but they don't use that in Etheria, because the Earth years is sort of like a relative term, because the Earth is constantly slowing and so on and so forth. And so they're actually, the term for it is a magnitude. It's at this particular magnitude of 500, we would say 576,000 years. Well, this 576,000 years is a whole number divisor of something, of some cycle in the great serpent. That's the connection between the great serpent and where the Earth is. And so that sum is sort of like the go-between. And this 576,000. So what is it? Well, it is not a whole number divisor of 4,704,000 years. The circuit. It's not a divisor of that. It's not a whole number divisor of that. So it's not a factor of it. And but what it is a factor of is 6 circuits. Now, 6 circuits are 28 million years in magnitude. Yes, 28 million something years or magnitude.
Right.
In duration.
We can find smaller cycles actually corresponding to that much greater number as well, can't we?
Right. Well, yes, and here's the beauty of that magnitude. We're going to call this particular circuit an Ankh circuit. This or an Ankh cycle. This particular when you have 6 circuits. 6 circuits, we're calling it an Ankh. It's an Ankh cycle. Now, what this means is that if you think of the sun in its circuit, now we can see in Oahspe the circuit looks circular. We know that that's a 2-dimensional thing, and if we turn it this way, then we see it's actually a coil, and so it's actually moving. The circuit itself, in other words, is being carried within a larger vortex, within a carrying vortex.
Yeah,
Okay.
like this, as the sun goes, and it's doing its spiral going. The Earth
Right.
does its smaller spiral as it's following the Sun in its larger cycle. So the Sun is doing that in its circle.
Right, right. That's one way that you can look at it. Yes, and of this, so the Sun is moving along, and so 6 of these coils, because now I'm going to call them coils because we're looking at it in 3D space. 3D space, it's a coil. So we go 6 of these, and what this means is that as the Earth is traveling through, it has the ankh. It has an ankh that it knows where it is in relationship to everything out there through the ankh, which is the zodiacal belt. And what this means is if you think of a zodiac as it's a belt, think of a zodiac as being like a hex nut. Okay, that goes on a bolt. So you have a bolt, and the bolt goes up. And think of the bolt. Think of it. Put a little mark on that bolt thread, the outer bolt thread, and that's the Sun moving through it. And so you're screwing the bolt through, threading it through that nut, and that nut has 6 threads in it, or 6 coils.
Mm-hmm.
So that when you finish going through that 6th coil, you're actually leaving that nut, and there's another nut on top that then you move into in orientation. We actually, now I'm using this as a metaphor, but it's an apt metaphor, and really what it means in practical sense is that when we look at the zodiac, we see what we call constellations, and they're in a certain position with each other.
And then they'll change.
Yeah, when you go that distance, a different perspective, they look differently.
Definitely.
They're a different formation and everything. So after 6 circuits, the ankh is no longer recognizable. And when it first started out, you can't use it anymore for orientation. You basically have to start with a new orientation. Now that's putting in a metaphorical terms, or parallel terms, to help us perceive what's going on. Actually, there are 49 sums in an ankh. Now the sum, recall, is the 4 cubes together into 576,000 years. So those sums, 49 of those sums, will have occurred during the time it takes to go through that ankh cycle. And that ankh, that 49, that ankh is, it's interesting that there are 49, and there's 6 circuits, and there's 49 of these sums in the ankh cycle. And one of the reasons that it's interesting is if you look at the Eoptia. Remember, the Eoptian age, or any Eoptia, is 2/3 of a cube. Well, of these Eoptia, or Eoptian cycles, there are 49 Eoptian cycles in a circuit. In other words, in a sun's orbit, we might say, in its orbit, as it's being carried around. So, and there are 6 Eoptia in a sum. So this 6 and that 49 sort of, you can see them interplaying there. So that's kind of an interesting thing. But anyway, the point being at this ankh cycle, all lesser cycles, including the sum, the circuit, the sum, the cube, the Eoptia, the measure, which I didn't measure, measure is 72,000 years, which is half of a cube. And in Oahspe, we're told in Oahspe this is called the measure. And the gadols, we're told, Oahspe tells us there's 3 gadols in a measure, which makes 6 gadols in a cube, by the way. So there's that 6 again. Actually, it occurs quite often in relationship between these lesser cycles. Well, anyway, all the main cycles and all the lesser cycles or secondary cycles that a prophet of Jehovah looks at will be are whole number factors of the Ankh cycle itself. In other words, the Ankh cycle is the lowest common denominator, if you want to use mathematical terms, for these all these lesser cycles, these main and secondary cycles. In other words, these main and secondary cycles are whole number divisors of the Ankh cycle. And the Ankh cycle is the lowest whole number that all of them will divide into without having a remainder left over. So, right. So that's and how they're related. You see, they create context, and we can go into that perhaps some other time as to how they create context, and all this context is important to where we are today in this cosmic era.
Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.